Hi friends, this is Mithilesh K. Pandey. Today I am discussing Old English. The age is the date is between 450 to 1150 AD and the Anglo-Saxon period 449 to 1066 AD. The language and literature. The Old English period. First of all, we will discuss poetry. The Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, who invaded Britain in 5th and 6th centuries, brought with them common Germanic meter, but of their earliest oral poetry, probably used for panegyric, magic, and short narrative, little or none survives. For nearly a century after conversion of King Ethelbert I of Kent to Christianity about 600, there is no evidences that English wrote poetry in their own language, but Saint Vede the Venerable, in his Historia Ecclesiastica Gentis Anglorum, Ecclesiastical History of English People, wrote that in the late 7th century, Cadman, an illiterate Northumbrian cohort, was inspired in a dream to compose a short hymn in praise of creation. Cadman later composed verses based on scripture, which was expounded for him by monks at Strange Hall, now called Whiteby. But only the hymn of creation survives. Cadman legitimized the native verse form by adapting it to Christian themes. Other following his examples gave England a body of vernacular poetry unparalleled in Europe before the end of the first millennium. Alternative verse. Virtually all Old English poetry is written in single meter for a stressed line with syntactical break or caesura between the second and third stresses, and with alliteration linking the two levels of the line. This pattern is occasionally varied by six stress line. The poetry is formulaic, drawing on common set of stock phrases, phrase patterns, applying a standard epithet to various classes of characters, and depicting scenery with such recurring images as the eagle and wolf, which wait during battles to feast on carrion, and ice and snow, which appear in landscape to single sorrow. In the beast poem, such formulas, far from being tedious, give a strong impression of richness of the cultural found from which poets could draw other standard. Devices of this poetry are caning, a figurative name for thing usually expressed in a compound noun. Example, Son Road, used to name the sea. The variation, the repeating of single idea in different word, with each repetition adding a new level of meaning. That these verse techniques change little during 400 years of literary production suggests the extreme conversation of Anglo-Saxon culture. The major manuscript. The most Old English poetry is preserved in four manuscripts of the late 10th and early 11th century. The major manuscripts. Most Old English poetry is preserved in four manuscripts of late 10th and early 11th centuries. The Beowulf manuscript, British Library, contains Beowulf, Judith, and three prose tracts. The Exterior Book. Exterior Cathedral is a miscellaneous gathering of lyrics, riddles, didactic poem, and religious narratives. The Junius manuscript, Bodleian Library, Oxford, also called the Cadman manuscript, even though its contents are no longer attributed to Cadman, contains biblical paraphrases, and the Versailles book, found in the Cathedral Library in Versailles, Italy, contains saints, lives several short religious poems and prose homilies. In addition to the poems, in these books are historical poems. In the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, poetic rendering of Psalms 51 and 150, the 31 meters, including in King Alfred the Great translation of Boethius, the Consolatine Philosophy, the Consolation of Philosophy, magical, didactic, elegiac, heroic poems, and other miscellaneous interpreted with prose, jotted in margins, even work in stone or metal. Problems of dating. Few poems can be dated as closely as Caedmon's hymn, King Alfred composition fall in late 9th century, and Bede composed his death song within 15 days of this death on May 25, year 735. Historical poems such as the Battle of Burn were after 937 and the Battle of Meldon after year 991 are fixed by the date of events. They commemorates the translation of one Althlum. Riddles is not found not only in exterior book but also in an early 19th century manuscript at Ledeneth, and at least a part of Dreams of Road can be dated by excerpt carved on the 8th century Ruthven cross in Dumfriesshire, Scott. But in the absence of such indications, Old English poems are hard to date, and scholarly consensus that most were composed in Midlands and the North in the 8th and 9th centuries gave way to uncertainty during the last 2 decades of the 20th century. Many now holds that the Wanderer, Beowulf, other poems once assumed to have been written in 8th century are of the 9th century or later. For most poems, there is no scholarly consensus beyond belief that they were written between 8th and the 11th century. Religious verses. If few poems can be dated accurately, still fewer can be attributed to particular poets. The most important author from whom a considerable body of work survives is Cynewulf, who wove his runic signature into the epilogues of 4 poems. Aside from his name, little is known of him. He probably lived in 9th century of Marica, Northumbria. His work include the Facts of the Apostle, the Short Martyrology, the Ascension, also called Christ's Second, a homily biblical narrative, Juliana, a saint's passion, set in the reign of Roman Emperor Maximin, late 3rd century, and Elaine, perhaps the best of his poem, which describe the mission of Saint Helena, mother of Emperor uh, Constantine, to recover Christ's cross. Cynewulf's work is lucid and technically elegant. His theme is the continuing evangelical mission from the time of Christ to triumph of the Christianity under Constantine. Several poems by Cynewulf are associated with him because of their subject matter. This includes 2 lives of Saint Gotthilf and Andreas, the latter apocryphal, a story of how Saint Andrew fell in hands of the cannibalistic and presumably mythical. Myrmidonians had stylistic affinities with Beowulf. Also in the Cynewulf group are several poems with Christ as their subject, of which the most important is the Dream of Road, in which the cross speaks of itself as Christ's royal diadem, it the instrument of his death. This tragic paradox echoes a recurring theme of secular poetry, at the same time movingly expresses the religious paradoxes of Christ's triumph in death, humankind's redemption from sin. Several poems of Junius manuscript are based on the Old Testament narrative Genesis, Exodus, and Daniel. Of this, Exodus is remarkable for its intricate diction and bold imagery. The fragmentary Judith of Beowulf manuscript strangely embellishes the story from Apocrypha of the heroine who led the zoo to victory over the Irisians. Elegiac and heroic verse. The term elegy is used for Old English poem that lament the loss of worldly goods, glory, or human companionship. The wanderer is narrated by the man deprived of Lord and kinsman whose journey led him to realization that there is stability only in heaven. The seafarer is simpler, but its journey motive more explicitly symbolizes the speaker's spiritual yearnings. Several others have similar themes, and three elegies: the husband's message, the wife lament, and the wolf Indwaker, describe what appears to be conventional situation. The separation of husband and wife by husband's exile, dour, brights the gaps between elegy and heroic poem, for in it a poet laments the loss of its position at court by alluding to sorrowful stories of Germanic legend. Beowulf itself narrates the Battle of Beowulf, a prince of the Gates, a tribe what is now southern Sweden, against the monstrous Granadel. Granadel's mother and the fire-breathing dragon account contains some of the best elegiac verse in language, and by setting marvelous tales against the historical background in which victory is always temporary and strife is always renowned, the poet gives whole an elegiac cast. Beowulf also is one of the best religious poems, not only because of its explicitly Christian passages, but also become Beowulf's monstrous foes are depicted as God's enemies and Beowulf himself as the God's champion. Other heroic narratives are fragmentary of Battle of Finsburg and Walder. Only enough remains to indicate that when whole they must have been fast-paced and stirring. Of several poems dealing with English story, preserved in the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, the most notable is Battle of Burnwork, the panegyric on the occasion of King Aethelstan's victory over the coalition of Norsemen and Scots in year 937. But the best historical poem is not from the Anglo-Saxon chronicle, the Battle of Maldon, which described the defeat of Ealdorman Wyeth North and much of his army of Hands and Viking invaders in year 991, discoverers in defeat and occasional to celebrate the historical ideal, contrasting the determination of many of Wyeth North's than to avenge his death or die in the attempt with cowardice of other who left the field. Minor poetic genres include catalogs, two sets of Maxime and Wyeth's, and list of the rules, tribes and notables in the heroic age, dialogues, metrical prefaces and epilogues to prose, works of Alfredrian period, and liturgical poems associated with the Benedictine office, prose. The earliest English prose work, the Law Code of King Ethelbert I of Kent, was written within a few years of arrival in England, year 997, of St. Augustine, Canterbury. Other 7th and 8th century prose, similarly practical in character, includes more laws, wills, and character. According to Cuthbert, who was the monk at Jarrow, bed at the time of his death, had just finished a translation of Gospel of St. John. Though this does not survive, two medical tracts, Hervarium Medicina de Quande Padivas, very little likely date from the 8th century. Early translation into English. The earliest literary prose dated from the late 9th century, when King Alfred, eager to improve the state of English learning, led a vigorous program to translate English certain books that are necessary all men to know. Alfred himself translated the Pastoral Care of Saint George I the Great, the Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius, the Soliloquies of Saint Augustine of Hippo, and first 50 Psalms. His pastoral care is fairly literal translation, but his Boethius is extensively distracted and revised to make explicit Christian message that medieval commentators saw in work. He revised the Soliloquies even more radically, departing from his source to draw from Georgi and Saint Jerome, as well as from other works by Augustine. Alfred's preface to these works are of a great historical interest. At Alfred's urging, Bishop Warforth of Worcester translated the dialogues of uh, Geoffrey. Probably Alfred also inspired anonymous scholar to translate Bede Historica Ecclesiastica and Polus Orosius Historium Adversum Paganos Leviri 7, yani means 7 books of history against the pagans. Both other works are much abridged. The Bede translation from follows other sources lavishly, but the translator of Orosius added many details of North European geography and also accounts of the voyage of Othere and Norwegian Ulfesten the Dane. These accounts, in addition to their geographical interest, show that friendly commerce between England and Scandinavia was possible even during the Danish War. Anglo-Saxon Chronicle probably originated in Alfred's region. Its earliest annals, beginning in region of Julius Caesar, are iconic except the entry of year 755, which records in detail a feud between West Saxon king Cynewulf and would-be usurper Sinehard. The entries covering the Danish War of late 9th century are much fuller, and those running from the region of Ethelred II and to the Norman conquest in the year 1066. When the Anglo-Saxon chronicles exist in several versions, contains many passages of excellent writing. The early 10th century is not notable for literary production, but some of the homilies in Versailles book and Valley-Kling manuscript, uh, Skye Library, Prankton University belong to that period. Late 10th and 11th century prose. The prose literature of mid to late 10th century is associated with the Benedictine reform, a movement that sought to impose order and discipline on monastic establishment that was thought to have grown lax. Athwold, Bishop of the Winchester and one of the leaders of the reform, translated the rule of Saint Benedict, but the greatest and most prolific writer of this period was his pupil Elfric, the monk at the Cairney and later abbot uh, in Sam, whose work include 3 cycles of 4 homilies, each Catholic homilies, 2 volume, and Lives of the Saints, as well as homilies. Now these cycles are Latin grammar, treatise on time and natural history, pastoral letters, and several translations. His Latin colloquy supplies with an Old English version by anonymous glossarist gives a fascinating glimpse into the Anglo-Saxon monastic classroom. Ælfric wrote with lucidity and astonishing beauty, using rhetorical devices of Latin literature frequently but without ostentation. His later alternative prose, which loosely imitates the rhyme of Old English poetry, influenced writer long after the Norman conquest. Ulfesten, Archbishop of York, wrote legal code, both civil and ecclesiastical, and number of homilies, including Sermo Lupi ad Angelos, Ulf addressed to English, ferocious denunciation of the moral of his time. To judge from number of extant manuscript, these two writers were enormously popular. Whitworth or of Romsey wrote several Latin works and Aristian, a textbook on calendar. Notable for its ornate style, numerous enormous works, some of very high quality, were produced in this period, including Homilius and live dialogues and translation of his work as the Gospel, several Old Testament books, liturgical letters, monastic rules, penitential handbooks, and the Romans Apollonius of Tyre, translated from Latin but probably derived from Greek original. The works of Benedictine reform were written during a few remarkable decades around the turn of millennium. Little original work can be securely dated to period after Ulfesten's death in year 1023. But the continued vigor of the Anglo-Saxon chronicle shows that good Old English prose was written right to the Norman conquest. By the end of this period, English had been established as a literary language with a polish, versatility unequaled among European vernaculars. Thank you, friends. I sincerely appreciate your attention today. If anyone has any question, please feel free to ask now. I will do my best answer. Please like, share, and subscribe my YouTube channel. I will present here with some another topic next time. Till then, goodbye.